So we have our anterior lobe and we have posterior lobe. Now this is the Martini version. So what we have here is that we have all these hormones that are secreted by the pituitary gland. These are all those stimulating and tropic hormones, but we also have prolactin and growth hormone. Now there's something called melanocyte-stimulating hormone and it's secreted by the pars intermedia. Now Martini considers the pars intermedia part of the anterior lobe. And so anterior pituitary hormones to review. So we have ACTH, TSH, prolactin, growth hormone, FSH, and LH. So this is my mnemonic for it. Active teens prefer getting free lunches. Now, melanocyte-stimulating hormone. So this is why I put a little asterisk. If you're, I'm actually going to move away from this from Martini because again I'm going to open stacks and probably phasing Martini out eventually. So Martini considers MSH and the pars intermedia as part of the anterior pituitary. That's why I put that asterisk there. But OpenStax is actually more accurate. It describes the MSH as within the intermediate zone or intermediate lobe of the brain. Now the thing is that, so yeah, this is the OpenStax version. So it doesn't classify it as anterior, and I want you to go with the OpenStax version for this. So even if you have the Martini book, go with the OpenStax version for melanocyte-stimulating hormone. And why do I make that? Well, this is what you see here. So this is what Martini considers the anterior pituitary lobe. This is the pars distalis, which is most of the bulk of the anterior pituitary lobe. And here's the posterior pituitary lobe. But this pars intermedia, notice that at the histological level, you can tell the difference between this and the pars distalis of the anterior pituitary lobe. So this is why you might see it referred to in other textbooks and other classes and other references. This pars intermedia is sometimes called the intermediate lobe, or in OpenStax they call it the intermediate zone. Now what we have here is that, okay, so this is a human anatomy and physiology by FYI. So what we see here is that here's what the thing that would be the pars distalis. We consider the anterior lobe in humans, but notice that the pars intermedia in other organisms such as fish, the pars intermedia is much more developed. So you often see this in like human biology and evolution, like things like we have a tailbone, we have a tail so to speak, but compared to other things, it's what we call a vestigial organ. So an intermediate lobe is kind of like that. It's kind of shrunk in humans over evolution. Now MSH, what is this? Melanocyte-stimulating hormone, and if you were here for PHYL 141, you might remember what melanocytes are, right? So these are produced by the intermediate pituitary lobe. So this is the way I remember it. So MSH is produced by the intermediate part. And then this causes melanocytes to produce something called melanin. Melanin is a chemical. Now the role in humans is poorly understood, and why? Because you see that it's kind of shrunk over time. So it's not really vital for, that's what we see in these vestigial organs. They're not really vital to our living and reproduction, but it's not the major cause of pigmentation in healthy adults. So melanin is what gives us our skin color. What is the major cause of pigmentation in adults? Well, it's not MSH. So what causes it? Well, what happens if you tan on the beach? Eventually that changes your skin color eventually, right? So melanin production, a big trigger of melanin production is just ultraviolet light exposure in our skin. Now here are our melanocytes, and this is what you see with these dark cells you see right here. So these melanocytes compared to the surrounding cells, these are full of melanin. Again, this is all review from PHYL 141. If this is confusing and new for you, maybe you should look at I suggest you look at the skin and integument lectures from PHYL 141. Now, they make and store this chemical called melanin. So melanin, the more melanin you have, the darker your skin tone. So melanin is this kind of like reddish, dark brown, blackish kind of pigment. So it is a color. It does cause skin coloration. Now, ultraviolet radiation to review from last semester. So we have layers of our skin. And then we have things called, well, there are 3 types of radiation, but UVC is mostly screened out by our ozone layer. But what we call ultraviolet A and ultraviolet B wavelengths, these can penetrate our skin. UVA rays, they penetrate a little deeper than UVB rays, but they both can affect our skin and the cells in our body. So what we see here, and why is ultraviolet radiation, why do we need melanin? Well, here's the DNA. So when you have UV photons, actually all wavelengths of light, they do carry some energy. But compared to visible wavelengths of light, like our typical colors of the rainbow, ultraviolet light has more energy than our visible light spectrum. So these carry energy. And if you remember your chemistry lectures and your general chemistry, so photons carry energy, but bonds are also made and broken by absorbing energy as well. So energy can break chemical bonds. So if you have all these chemical bonds in DNA and then you have UV photon kind of bombarding these DNA, it can cause disruptions, it can break bonds, it can also cause the formation of irregular bonds. So what we have here is that UV radiation is damaging DNA. Now, this is where melanin comes in and why melanin is important. So when you have melanin, what it does is kind of act as a shield. So melanin is a chemical. It does have all these chemical bonds. If you've had organic chemistry, notice that all these double bonds are kind of resonant with each other. So if you have this photon coming in, the cool thing is that melanin can absorb this energy, and by melanin absorbing this energy, this UV photon can't carry on and damage this DNA. So this is why melanin is very important. It kind of helps acts as a shield and takes the hit that would be so these UV photons, they're coming here to try to damage the chemical bonds in your cells, but melanin's there to kind of take the hit for all those chemicals, including DNA. And this is why we tan. So again, the interesting thing is that UV rays also stimulate these cells called melanocytes to produce more melanin. And this is why we tan. So when UV ultraviolet rays reach these melanocytes, they produce more and more melanin. And as you produce more of this dark melanin, this is why our skin gets darker when we're exposed to UV light. Unless you have very fair skin, then you might just burn. But if you're you have the skin type that produces more melanin, this is why you typically tan. So then what we have here, so the interesting thing is that UV light is also important for producing a hormone called cholecalciferol, or vitamin D3. Now, let's go back to Top Hat. I know it's been a while, but let's open up Top Hat. Allow everyone to log in. So what type of hormone is vitamin D3? Alright, let's see the responses. So it looks like most of you said peptide. Some of you, the second place we have steroid, and then we have monoamine in third place. And the others said eicosanoid and thyroid hormone. What is the correct answer? Vitamin D3 is a steroid. I know it's kind of tricky, so I'm glad it's I'm going to explain why, because it is kind of counterintuitive. You're like, wait, that doesn't have the 4 rings like a typical steroid and cholesterol. So why is vitamin D3 a steroid? So what we see here is that, remember that steroid hormones, they're all derived from the cholesterol. So in typical steroids, we see these 4 rings right here. So remember, my mnemonic is just 3 hexagons and a pentagon. You have a steroid. Now with vitamin D3, how do you make vitamin D3? Well, the interesting thing is that you have this steroid right here. You still see those 4 rings, the 3 hexagons and a pentagon. But what we have here with vitamin D3 is that you have UV rays coming in. And this, remember, ultraviolet rays, these photons carry energy. This energy can break chemical bonds, and that's exactly what happens here. So these UV rays, they come in, they break those chemical bonds, and what happens is that now this ring right here becomes broken and it falls apart. So this little ring right here is now dangling. So this is why vitamin D3 is a steroid. It comes from 7-dehydrocholesterol. Again, this is organic chemistry, but what I'm getting at here, it still has that steroid, that typical cholesterol structure, until a UV ray comes in and breaks one of those rings. So it's not a peptide, it doesn't have those peptide bonds. It's not a monoamine because it's not made from tryptophan or tyrosine. So yes, vitamin D3 is a steroid, but it doesn't look like a typical steroid because of that broken ring. Alright, so then let's go. So remember that the pituitary hormones, they control all of these hormones over here. Now, let's see. The thing is that in the remaining time, yeah, we still have time. So here's a typical hormone cascade. We have CRH, ACTH, and cortisol. Now, we talked about, so this is saying how to make a hormone signal once you initiate it, how to make it stronger and stronger. But remember that in the examples of growth hormone and prolactin, that you can't have high levels of hormone all the time. You kind of need hormones when you need it. But how do you turn this whole thing off? So we talked about how to turn hormones on, but do hormones stay on the whole time? No, they don't. So how do you turn this whole system off? And this is how you turn it off. So notice what we this is what we covered in the previous lectures, how you stimulate and cause these hormone cascades. But now this is how you how you press the brakes on this whole system. And this is how you turn it off.